Life is hectic, demanding, and doesn't stop. When honest with ourselves, we must confess we often don't know what the hell we're doing. The Larkcast is an ongoing conversation about the inclusive and mischievous nature of God's presence through the lens of all the things that make up this phenomenon we refer to as life. Astonishing grace and refreshing honesty collide right here for your weekly encouragement. Welcome to the Larkcast. Yes, welcome to the Larkcast. Hello to all of you Larks out there, and to all of you who are kicking the tires of who Jesus is and what does it really look like to live in the freedom faith was always meant to bring. That's what we're about. That's why we're here. If you're following us on, or I should say, if you're watching this on YouTube, our lesser known avenue for content, you're probably seeing a couple other faces in addition to mine. And you're probably saying, you know what? These faces I think they look better than Tony. I do.
Definitely. Oh, speaking of Tony.
Ooh. Just a coffee mug there with a little quick dig to our boy. Shout out to him. And yeah, this is one of those episodes that we call the Larks. It's a chance for us to actually sit down and grab some stories, hear some stories, be encouraged by stories. Because let's face it, people learn through story. I would say more so than anything else. That's why we decided to do this. So you will see my co-host with me today, Miss Sarah Mazzara. Yep. Coming in from, where are you at, Sarah? The tattoo shop today or home?
Tattoo shop today. I got it all to myself.
Man, look at there.
I know.
And with us is Mr. James Purrazzo. Yeah, Jimmy. James, I'm going to turn this over to Sarah and let her lead this conversation because she's going to do better at it than I. I'm going to have some fun and chat here and there as we go. But before I hand the reins over here, dude, I got to see the coffee mug.
Oh, this one?
Yeah, I caught an eye. I caught that a minute ago. Spin that thing around there for us.
Yeah.
The Golden Girls, dude.
Yeah.
I love it.
Thank you for being a friend.
I love it. So being a kid in South Florida where I grew up in the 80s, right when that show came out, I just got to share this. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents growing up. Super close, with both of them. And man, my pop loved the Golden Girls. And I would sit in his lap, dude, every week and watch that show. And I swear I was probably the only first grader who, when there was show and tell, I was like, well, today I want to talk to you about my favorite TV show, The Golden Girls. It's actually a true story. So there's my story in the stories. And with that said, Miss Sarah, take us away on this journey into this gentleman's story of freedom.
Sounds good. So James is here with us today. He is my brother. He is my children's godparent, along with his beautiful wife. He is Nono and Nona to my children. And the power that this man has in a room, if you've had an experience with him in a room, you know what I'm talking about. And the thing about this podcast that we just want to hit hard every single time is the power of listening. I think we miss out so much on wanting to be heard. We're over talking over everyone, or we're debating or judging in our head. The power of just sitting back and listening to someone's story. So James and I have chatted leading up to this. He's got his story, and Russ and I are going to interact. We have a little inside peek because Russ and I have been a part of James's story for a very long time. And I cannot wait for you to meet Mr. James Purrazzo, who, by the way, was introduced to me as Jem. And I hate it. I hated it. I was like, no, I'm calling you James. So to me, James Purrazzo, please tell us where you grew up, which will explain the accent people are going to catch in this podcast today.
Yeah, for sure. I've actually known you guys for 12 years, by the way. I was just thinking about this the other day. It's probably a little more than that, but right around 12 years. It's pretty wild.
Mhm.
All right. My name is James Purrazzo. And I'm born and raised on the south side of Chicago to an extremely Italian and Greek family split right down the middle. My family has super strong ties to that area. Both my parents are from there, and no one has left except me. So I'm currently in Littleton, Colorado. Moved here in 2020. But until then, I never left the South Side for more than 7 days my entire life. So, let's see, my parents are both first generation Americans. I'm in the middle of three boys and to a very tight family. Probably one would consider an extremely passionate family, very loud,
No kidding.
very, yeah, very traditionally tied to the things that make us who we are from what they identified with was their heritage. So just a really loud, close family and a family who never met a stranger too. So I grew up with I would say a medium-sized immediate family, cousins, but an extremely large family made up of friends that were all called uncles and aunts. And my dad was the type of person who never met a stranger. And people would be at parties that were just, my dad was just really good at bringing different circles of people together and just everybody was welcome. So, and that's pretty much a lot of like where I grew up is like though too. It's just very close, tight knit. Oddly enough, nobody travels any farther than 2 hours. So like from where they live. So even when you would like go on vacation, so like we go on vacation, we end up going 2 hours up into Michigan, and we would be there with all of the people that we literally lived around anyways. So it's like you really did vacation away from anybody. Like everybody went to the same place. So it was pretty wild. So
And let me tell you, when they befriend somebody and they bring them in to be a family member, I was brought in, we were close friends. I get brought in for Easter and I'm terrified to meet your mom. And there's no stranger aspect to that at all because she comes straight up to me. She's cooking wildly in the kitchen. And she's like, will you grab those green onions and start cutting? And I'm like, yes, ma'am. And that was like the first thing she said to me. So I'm chopping the green onion and she's like, why are you chopping the onions like that? And I was like, I don't know. So she shows me how to chop them. And then she's like, go all the way down. Don't waste any of it. I'm like, okay. And so I keep chopping. So there is no stranger in the Purrazzo home.
yeah, you're getting brought in tight. That's for sure. So like
my family and I got to hang with you guys for the first time with your family at Christmas. And to this day, my wife and I would both say that Christmas Eve with your family when we lived in Chicago, still to this day, we both say that Christmas Eve, that night, meeting them, even though for the first time, is bar none our most like top of the list Christmas experience in 47 years.
that's good to hear.
Like
it's very
unreal.
Fun.
Yeah.
Very fun.
It's good to hear. Yeah, you don't there's no lead up into get brought into it. It's just like you're jumping in the pool with everybody. So
which is how it should be. It's how it should be.
It's like it's like going to a church.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay. I'm just kidding.
So James, as first
I was sorry.
generation,
I gotta say, I was just in a conversation with a guy about that. It was a very opposite experience, and that's why it was on my mind. Sorry, didn't mean to make that dig. Yeah. Keep going.
So, James, as first generation Italian and Greek, what was the religious aspect at home? I'm sure that follows the cultural identity within that too.
Yeah. So just by tradition, Italians, Catholics, by tradition, Greeks or Greek Orthodox, and both are very strict. They're tied into your culture. So, we were not like just brought into one, we were brought into both. So we would split, I would say, I wouldn't necessarily say that we were traditional, a church going family. Like the idea of faith was more of it was a background experience. It was more of just like the experience of being part of the church culture than it was anything related to a relationship with God. So with that, like the Greek Orthodox Church it's gorgeous, but it is very, very, very traditionally based. And it's like if you just were to jump in, you're met with a lot of like beautiful traditions, but it's very hard to grasp about what's going on. And then the Catholic service is what it is from a younger perspective. I was just kind of like in the run of it. With that being said, traditionally my dad was brought up through all the Catholic traditions, and so were all of us. First communion, and then into CCD. The CCD is like essentially like an educational program leading up to what's called a confirmation. And there's like, I don't want to necessarily say like rites of passage, but they're parts of the Catholic tradition. So, and I'm sure that they have their degrees of importance and reasons behind it. But from my standpoint, this you kind of couple with this was just something that I was brought up around as a tradition and not as like an actual base of relationship. And you couple with that with the fact that I was just an obstinate, shitty kid who liked getting in trouble and didn't listen very well. And I'm stuck in a classroom trying to learn about stuff that I realistically don't care about, other than I was told to be here. And I just remember like I was sitting there in this class for what's called CCD, and they had this big, thick red Bible. And I remember just like paging through it. And I was just like reading things. And I remember just like, I had a question about this. And we're not talking about the Gospel of John or something. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I have a question about it, and wouldn't get an answer. I would get told like, well, it's just because. And then I remember like reading Revelations. Good job, James, on that one. I'm like, this is a lot. What's this whole thing about? And you're like, we're not getting into that right now. And I remember just like I had all these questions, and this poor lady who was just volunteering her time is just dealing with me and then also dealing with all my questions that she probably couldn't answer for herself anyways.
And how old are you at this time?
So I'm 8th grade at this point.
Okay. So like 13, 14.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I thought you were talking about like last year.
Yeah. Dude, this lady took and this is past all my questions. She took and wrote this big circle on the chalkboard and the small one in the center, and she colored the one in the center in. She's like, all these people in this big circle are people that believe in God. And all these people in the small circle are Catholics. And these people are going to heaven, and the rest of the people are going to hell. And I'm
Damn.
like,
Jesus, you suck at your job.
So I raised my hand. I'm like, my mom's Greek Orthodox, and she's not a Catholic. She's like, well, I can't account for your mom. I'm like, well, you don't know my mom. You don't know who she is. You don't know what she believes. She's like, I can't account for your mom. And that big, thick red Bible I was talking about, I took that book and I stood up and I threw it so hard across the classroom against the wall, and I lost it. I lost it on her. Shared probably a few expletives that were not welcome, and I stormed out of the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember in that moment, the priest of the parish we went to at the time, like, kind of heard about what's going on, and he met me, and he was like, he wasn't, angry. He was just trying to console me. I was pretty upset, and didn't there was no reprimand for it, but I remember my dad came and picked me up, and like I explained to him what happened, and I remember my dad saying to me, he's like, "Hey, listen, at some point, you're gonna have to choose whether or not this is a part of your life. Until then, like, I need you to go through with this for your mom and just see this out." And I agreed to do it, but like there was like a split in this moment. I'm doing this for like the tradition's sake of my family, but in my heart, like I was done. Like this just fed into I mean, like you're kicking the tires of this as a kid anyways. You really don't understand. Like I really wasn't brought up around like what this meant or what this was. And I just ran the other way. I'm just like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't buy this, dude. And it just got coupled and met with like through the rest of my adolescence into adulthood into just like this false gospel of just atheistic beliefs. Um,
Mhm.
so I guess my fallout was just kind of fed to things that were already going on. I was already kind of just like a rough kid, anyways. Just most Southside kids are. That's fine.
Most
But
middle children, I'm sure
yeah,
too.
you could
Yeah.
throw that one in there too. But
Yeah.
like you just I got in a lot of trouble. Um, arrested a lot, drugs, drinking, never any hardcore stuff, just, you know, but I just lived my life away from anything regarding religion. And
Mm-hmm.
this, I had a pretty strong false gospel that I'd walk around with, and I'd love to just kind of like destroy people's actual um, beliefs with. So I wasn't necessarily the nicest kid to be around to state that you were a Christian. So that kind of became pretty predominant in college, um, where it was just like even in circles of friends, I would just trash people, and just because I like to see people squirm, and so
Mhm.
yeah, I actually at that point in my life I took some joy in it, but went to college from there.
What did you go to college for?
So I was a pre med student. I wanted to go to physical therapy school, but was looking into like just for some reason I was obsessed with cardiology. Um, but I ended up going into EMT school while I was in college because I was a little kid. I wanted to be in the fire service so bad. That actually is a pretty cool story. So like, and it does tie into like my story to begin with. So when I was like 5 years old, I watched my dad's mother die, my nana. So she had a heart attack, and I remember as a kid like watching my dad struggle with like just trying to figure out what to do. And like, dude, do you guys know what nitro is? Like for people that have like, they're older and they have like cardiac issues, they carry this stuff called nitro, and they use these little tabs that like, if you are having cardiac chest pain, they tell you to take these tabs, and it's supposed to reduce the chest pain. So like causes your blood vessels to dilate so that you can get to the hospital if you are having like cardiac issue, so that like they can further intervene there. Well, my nana she wasn't the best like keeping up on this stuff, and my dad finds her nitros in the bottom of her purse, and it's like dust in this small little vial, like it's just done. And he's like, "Oh gosh!" And I remember it's my little brother and I in the back seat of our car, and my nana's having this heart attack. The fire department shows up, and I remember just feeling like helpless as a kid. Um, And I'm like, just do something, like, please do something. And I remember watching everybody work together, and but just like this feeling of like helplessness is what fed this desire for me of like, I don't ever want to feel that again. And if someone is going through that, I want to be the person that's there to help them. And that's kind of what fed me into like I know this is what I want to do, but I was told to go to college. So like, sure, fair enough. There's like a tradition in that too, with as far as like how my parents had to grind from, coming from nothing to just really making it, being self-made people, hardworking, self-made people, and they wanted the same for us. Um, but EMT school fed into me starting to test around for the fire department. Um, and then I remember there was just like a point where I already had my EMT, and I'm like, I'm not doing this college thing anymore. Like and it was the first time in my life where like I started feeling everybody else around me um state that I'm making the wrong decision leaving college. But I had so much peace in this moment that no, I'm actually making the right choice here. Like I have there's something that's telling me like everything's going to be okay. So why that's important is because after I had my EMT, I finally got a job. Like I always worked and lived on my own. As soon as I was like 18 years old, I was out on my own. And I got this job with this ambulance company. I'm going to refrain from saying the name because it was not the greatest job. But I started working like just, and it wasn't like an emergency response ambulance company. They did like very lowercase BLS like care for people, and it was like people in nursing homes. Like there was a need for it. But why is all this important? Because I met somebody working there that changed my life.
Let's tell the true way you met that somebody on your first day of work. How did that happen? How did that go about?
Okay.
It's a great story.
All right. So I'm still in Chicago at this point. I lived at the corner of Roosevelt and Ashland, and oddly enough, I lived in a parish house of this Lutheran church. It was an awesome setup, but we were like right off of a really busy street. And I'm running late for work, and I'm on my phone calling this place, being like, "I'm running late. I'm sorry. Like, please put my partner on the phone." And it was this guy, Chad Mazzaro. It's the first time I've ever worked.
I'm married to that man.
Russ, this is the first time I've ever worked with Chad. He's never met me before. He doesn't know who I am. And I'm like talking to him on the phone, be like, "Listen, dude, I'm running late." And I'm walking up to my car, and I open up my car, my driver's side door, and it smells horrible in my car. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what is this? What is that?" And I look in the back seat, and there's this homeless guy sleeping in the back seat of my car. I'm on the phone with Chad. Chad's never met me before. And I'm like, what is this? What are you doing? Get out of my car. And I open up the back seat. I rip this guy out of my car. I'm like, "You stink. Get out. Oh my gosh. I don't even have time to deal with this stuff. Get out of here." And I'm throwing all his stuff out of my car. And I'm like, I'll see you in a bit. So I can only imagine Chad's in there just what is going on? And I'm on the way to work, and it's okay. Preference. It's February. I think it was February. It's 20 degrees outside. It's snowing. And I have all the windows down in my car because it smells so bad. That was Chad's intro to me. So,
and my intro to you, because Chad comes home from work and he's like, "Dude, my partner today, hell of a story." He's telling me, I'm like, "He didn't care. He didn't call the cops." And he's like, "No, he just told me, get out." And then the whole way to work, he's like, "It smells like shit. It smells like piss. It stinks so
Yeah.
bad in here, dude.
Yeah. Yeah. It was
Oh
rough.
man.
It was awesome.
So like I get to work and I'm working with this guy and we've never worked together before. We don't know each other. So basic like intro stuff, you know, where you at? Where you from? Why you here? So he starts sharing with me. He's like, yeah, I'm Chad. I'm from California. I'm like, oh, God, I hate people from California. Like, okay, where are you from in California? And he's like, I'm from Pacifica, California. I'm like, okay. I'm like, all right, what's that? He's like, it's like this beach town up in the like Northern California. It's like this beautiful place. And I'm looking around and it's snowing. It's February. It's freaking cold out. We're stuck in traffic. I'm like, why are you here? What are you doing here? Like, ugh, why did you leave that for here? And he's like, oh, I go to Moody Bible Institute. I'm here for college. I'm like, okay, what's that? No, he said I go to Moody. I'm like, oh, I don't know. I don't know what that is. What's Moody? He's like, it's a Bible college. I'm like, oh, here we go. Okay. I'm like, all right, Bible boy, tell me about why you're going to Bible school. You know, like, and he's like, well, you know, I have like this relationship with God. And you know, I wanted to pursue it. Like it's something that's like a huge part of my life. And I just start needling the piss out of him. Like I remember just asking questions and like throwing out all my false BS that felt so true to me at the time. And I was not met with religion with him. It was not met with the structure, um, desire to fit. I was met with him describing a relationship with God. And I was like, okay, I don't know what to do with this. So I just kept needling him over and over, just all my BS questions that I would like try to hammer people with. And it's just like he would, you know, so what do you think about like this thing? What do you think about chaos theory? And he'd be like, I don't even know what that is, but yeah, I mean, if that's something that's mysterious too, yeah, I guess I'd struggle with that too. Like it wasn't like I was met with like I have all the answers. Um, I can defeat that, like for what we would know as like apologetics now. Like I was just met with, I don't, I don't know, dude. I struggle with things too. I'm not perfect in this, and I have no reason to make this perfect. So I was just kind of like perplexed with this. And at the time, Chad had one tattoo, and that is not him now. He's like covered from his like freaking neck down at this point. But like, he had a tattoo on his forearm. That's you're not gonna be able to see it, and said Joshua 1:9 on his forearm. So at that point in my life, tattoos had to they had to be so like meaningful and like, oh man, this thing, like, yeah, I had to get this tattooed. Not the case anymore. But like, I'm like, what's that on your arm? He's like, oh, it's a Bible verse. I'm like, okay, what is it? He's like, well, it's like this rock reminder of like who God is for me. It's like his Ebenezer, you know? And I'm like, all right, well, what is it? He's like, well, it's this verse out of Joshua. And I'm like, okay, well, what is that? He's like, it was Joshua 1:9. And I could see at this point, he's just like, I'm so tired of this guy's shit. Just shut up. Like, I'm like, well, what does this say? And he says, just say it. He says it means, for the Lord said, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or dismayed. For I am with you wherever you go. And sorry. I'm not
Good,
sorry.
brother.
I'm not sorry. In that moment, I remember, I don't need to remember, I feel it right now. I had something hit me in the chest and it pushed me back in my seat. And I remember just looking forward. And I had this I was like, what is going on? I remember just sitting back in my seat. And I remember just I felt like the only way I can describe it is I legitimately felt like a warmth in my chest. And I felt like I've been waiting to hear those words my whole life. And so I'm still working with this guy, and we're going to take care of somebody, and we're in an elevator, and I'm literally standing across from this guy with the stretcher in between us. And I remember just my eyes are turning up, I'm crying. And I'm like, just say it again. And I didn't want to talk to him for the rest of the shift because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. And that's not like me. I didn't know. I was just shaken up. And I remember for 3 weeks just trying to just defeat the piss out of what just happened to me. I remember trying to just break up what I experienced and tried to justify it with something else. And I just couldn't do it. And I remember just trying to 3 weeks went by. I'm like, hey, let's talk. He's like, I know, let's talk. I know. And I'm like, I need to talk to you. He's like, I know you do. He's like, yeah, I've been praying for you for 3 weeks. And through conversations, just I didn't know how to kind of approach this. I didn't know what to say. This wasn't something I'm used to. This wasn't a do these things so you can be made right. It was just now a conversation. At that time, Chad and Sarah went to this church called Missio Dei. And they're like, hey, why don't you just come check this out with us and see what this is like? So I go with them.
We didn't invite you.
No?
You and James, my memory serves, you and James Fashion was like, I want to go to that church you all go to. I want to try out what you guys are learning this stuff from. That was my memory.
Cool. So I go there with you guys, and I don't know, this is weird Southern dude preaching that day on Job. Of all books, Job, this weird bald Southern dude.
He's a good-looking guy, I heard.
Yeah, just this slow draw accent. You know what I'm saying? Just he stuck out like a sore thumb in this place. Because I'm like, what is this? And first and secondly, too, I'm on the north side, which I'm like, I do not want to be here. I don't go north of Division to begin with.
You were in Wrigley territory,
yeah,
you White Sox boy.
Yeah, we're till death there. But we're literally
you got to hear about Jesus from a Southern dude 1 block from Wrigley Field, bro. That's not God winking at you. I don't know.
With a Californian friend.
Yeah, just all of these things that I cannot believe this is how this is happening. This is how it happens. And so this guy named Russ is preaching on Job of all things. I'm I don't remember much about what happened after that, but I remember I remember going to lunch with you and Sarah and Chad, and then I remember getting connected with Russ. And I remember being I don't know how it went down, but I remember Russ was just hey man, why don't you meet me for coffee? And I'm like, oh, cool. I'm going to meet this pastor for coffee, and I'm going to learn about some stuff I don't know about. So I go meet Russ for coffee, and I bring a Bible that I got from the thrift store. And like I like I got like a notebook and a backpack, and I like
I remember
freaking
this.
I like and I sit down, and he's got all his stuff out on the at the coffee shop ready, and I'm like, I put my stuff on a table, and I'm like, all right, so like, what are we doing? And he's like, well, I'm gonna do some work. And what are you gonna do? I'm like, I don't know. Like, no one's ever invited me for coffee before. I don't know what to do here. Like, so like he's like, no, that's not how. Like, I'm like, well, I want to learn about stuff. He's like, I know, but that's not how this works. Like, I'm not just gonna like sit here and spoon feed you this. He's like, that's not what Jesus did at all. I went on to describe like, no, like I will paraphrase this. He's like, but Jesus just showed people what this was like along the way. He didn't just sit down and tell them what to do. Like, he showed them. So he's like, so we're just gonna do life together. And there was no expectation of whether or not I got it. There was no metric of successful points in this. There was no like, check-ins as far as like, hey, how's your faith going thing, which just is one of my least favorite questions ever right now. But like, because it's not a question of faith. But it was just like, hey, listen, this is what this is friends with no strings attached. I legitimately just want to be your friend. And that's what Chad did. And that's what you did, Sarah. Like, um, I'm not expecting anything out of this other than you just give me the opportunity to walk with you. And that was like just super transformative for me. Like, because I wasn't met with a religious framework. I was met with people having a relationship, sharing the relationship with me. And that is clear in the gospel. This is so juxtaposed to what I was brought up around that I was like still just kind of bewildered at this point. Like, I didn't know what to do. Like, I was just kind of like, all right, I guess like I'll just come hang out with you, and then I'll read my Bible at home. And I just still remember like I was so on fire. I could not put this Bible down, this thrift store Bible. Like, I would just sit there and read this thing, and I'm like, this is the coolest thing I've ever read in my life. Like, I can't believe this is who God is. Like, reading the stories of the gospel, like the gospels, I just couldn't stop reading them. Um,
I remember I remember like after that, I'm just gonna throw this in here really quick. One, Chad and Sarah had told me about you 3 weeks before we started hanging out. Because Chad and Sarah and Krista and I and a few others used to hang out on the regular. We ate a lot of food together and had lots of conversations and prayed for people. And so when you showed up, it was like I remember Sarah pointing and going, "That's James."
I know where we were sitting too, up in the balcony on this.
Yep. And I just remember how cool that was, man. Like just, and I remember just inviting you, man, to just come be a friend. And what was cool was watching your hunger drive you into questions and scripture so that when you came back, right? Because we started meeting for coffee on a regular basis,
mhm,
like a few times a week. Um, you would always come in with a bunch of questions. But it wasn't like, hey, James, sit down, let me feed you what I think you need to know. It was
mhm,
me just being able to be a friend and help you think through what you were feeling, seeing, thinking, learning. And of course,
mhm.
Chad doing that, right?
Yeah.
While you're driving around in an ambulance with him. And it was I think there was a simplicity in that and a freedom that was found in that. And just to be honest with you, because I just want to throw this in here, I was learning that freedom myself, just to be clear. My journey, dude, as a pastor before all that was not not that approach. I was probably at that was right around the time when I started seeing like, oh, Jesus wasn't kidding when he said it's finished.
I think too, just like
We were
with
learning
that,
together, I guess is the point I'm trying to
I
yeah.
say.
know, and that's what's crazy. Like sitting here together, it's like we literally watched Russ go through his like deconstruction transition while we're kind of going through our new. It's just crazy that we're all a part of that
Yeah,
story and timeline together.
pretty wild.
There's a couple prevailing verses like within this season that I started like looking back on that, like, man, I remember that just hitting so hard in that season. And then I started thinking about it like after like kind of like trying to lay all this out and seeing that it's so funny how that was a prevailing verse or piece of scripture in the season, how that's actually been a prevailing verse throughout my entire story.
Mm.
Um, I'm going to go through two of them really quick. One of them is Matthew 26, 38, 39. Um, so I think one of the most predominant questions you get from people who are just kicking the tires of this or just completely obstinate to who God is like, how can you believe in a God who lets all these bad things happen? Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think I'm not going to get into that right now, but this was a prevailing part of my story. Like I already shared with you about my grandma, like, and then there's so many things that I've just kind of glossed over as far as like in my life of just like either heartbreak or just like really hard seasons in life where if I was a believer, I would absolutely question like where God was. And then how this has just been prevailing through my whole story too is like I've always struggled with God's sovereignty in the world and how he interacts. As I believe most people do. Um, but I remember this specifically hitting me in the book of Matthew, this 26, 38, 39. This is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He says, then he said to them, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me. Like he went a little further and he fell on his face and prayed, saying, O Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And we don't see the story change in the gospel. Like we're seeing like Jesus fully feel the weight of all past, present, and to come being put on him. And understanding like the absolute magnitude of what that means. And just like everybody else that experiences something that is extremely hard or heartbreaking or terrifying, he does the same thing we do. Like, he's like, this is horrible. God, if I don't want to do this. And he just had the ability to ask, like, but let this be something that you desire for me, but not I. So that was something like pivotal for me because it showed like there was a gray area within all of this that like I see on a daily basis when I go to work. Um, when you see something like really hard, I'm not going to get into details, but like I want you to just imagine like an extremely horrible scene where someone's loved one is getting hurt or has died. Um, I often hear God, no, please, no, please, no, please, no. Um, that's that moment right there.
Mm.
Like there is this outcome that God's will is set. And I know that like what I do for a living is I'm a seer and doer of God's will that is past me. Um, but I'm not going to say that's given me peace in those moments. But it's one of those moments that like along this part of my story, it being like a fresh believer, I was just getting into what I do for a living. And I was very fresh in it. And I saw a lot. I got thrown right into the pool super fast with what I do. And saw a lot of pretty horrific stuff right away that made me question a lot. And your skills aren't set and honed right away to realize that you're doing everything you need to do for somebody. There's still kind of a gray area in that too, as far as your confidence and abilities. And then you couple that with you're kind of just kicking the tires of this stuff and not really sure where you sit with it. And then all of a sudden you see like the depravity of the world. And you're kind of set with a man. Did God do this? Like, does God allow this stuff to happen? Is evil a part of this? How did God let evil intervene in this and make this happen? Like all things that I'm not going to answer right now, like realistically, because I can't. But it's allowed me to realize and live within that gray area, or Sarah said the other day, like that gray space. We're just like, I can't answer this right now, and it's okay. Just like Chad did when I was pressing him really hard. It's like, I don't have the answer to that one. And then the next, I'm moving on with no transitional material.
Well,
let me just
question.
Sure.
Oh,
Sure.
go ahead, Russ.
I was just going to say, like, just for the listeners, I think, part of your story, man, is, becoming this believer and moving on from, school and working, as you said, in this sort of certain type of, ambulance, right? Structure, business, etc., then to moving into, becoming a firefighter, paramedic in Chicago, and then now today in Denver. Um, that's always been a part of your story, man, as learning to trust Jesus and right learn who God is and what he's like in the midst of a job on the daily, man.
Mm-hmm.
As both, right, a husband and a father of little ones, where you're dealing with like real shit, man.
Mm-hmm.
So just wanted to just kind of throw that in there, like one, just for clarity for them, and then two, just to assure you, like, I feel it for you, bro.
For sure.
Glad that you're
So
sharing.
you have your parents who did not like that you dropped out of college, and they're Catholic through and through. And now their son who dropped out of college is meeting Jesus and going to a Christian church. How did that affect the dynamic of your home and relationships with mom and dad?
Okay, so there was a massive shift in me that they saw right away, and they're just kind of like, "Why aren't you going to a Catholic or Greek Orthodox service?" I'm like, I don't know. I don't even care. Like, I don't. That's not what's important to me right now. But they're like, "You're not drinking as much and getting hammered all the time, or you're like kind of piecing yourself together in a different way, carrying yourself differently."
And I'll
And
attest to that because I knew you before and after.
mm-hmm.
And like before, perception was like live wire, and then all of a sudden you're just like plugged in. And this like went to like, I don't know, like just peaceful, steady joy is like my perception. But
Mm-hmm.
I feel
So,
that
like,
with your parents.
a couple things. Number one, joy is a choice. Is not happiness. Those are two different things. You have to choose joy. You have to choose, and that's also my wife's name. So, yeah, there's like, amidst all the crap in your life, like, you have to choose to have joy in life, and that doesn't come from me. And I think that that was something that was seen from my parents, is just a massive shift. My brothers were kind of obstinate to like, I just like just like you're not a prophet in your own town. Like my brothers are like, yeah, whatever. Like, okay, sure. You're the same guy that got arrested like 5 times in 1 year, and my brother had to bail me out, and like, just all this dumb stuff that's like, okay, yeah, your story is your story. You can't change it, you know. But are the people that are closest to you really going to tag on to when you actually experience God? Like if they see it, like, and I don't blame my brothers at all at that moment. What was really interesting though was as soon as I like as soon as I like gave my life to Christ, I just started sharing with my parents. And that's like just Russ, this is a big thing for you and me. It was just like Matthew 28, 18 through 20 is go therefore, or Russ, as you are going, make disciples of all nations and creeds, baptize them, teach them all that I've commanded. Like, and these are the things that I was doing just in my house. Like, I don't know, I don't really don't remember how I was doing it. I don't know what it was like, but I know that like I remember I started having conversations with my dad, and I remember my dad all of a sudden being like, "Yeah, like I kind of want to start looking into that too." And like, um, what is really interesting is I started watching both of my parents' relationship change in a positive way. And I started watching both of my parents start doing things together. Well, not, I started watching my parents like, you know what, let's start going to church together. Let's start doing this more. So I'm going to kind of go down the road really quick and how this changed my parents' life. Like after that, my mom got very active with her church in Joliet, her Greek Orthodox church, in doing charity stuff with all the things that she was really connected to. My dad started getting involved with like a men's like Bible study that he was a part of until 2021, and like started sharing the gospel with everybody that walked into his office. And it was like, um, you're the light of the world. Like, and I want you to just imagine, like, this is something that's very visible for me because it's very pertaining to my job. But like, say I go into I'm working and I'm firefighting and I'm going into a house and I'm doing a search. You guys are just think about this. Like, there's a very dark area, right? And there's a dark square room, and I walk into it and I shine my light into one corner. Um, at that point, I'm illuminating one corner of the room, but it's very likely that the light that I'm putting into that room is touching each corner differently. It's changed the room. And that's what happens to us as believers. Like, it doesn't matter where we're at. Like, the place we're in does not change or cannot change anymore. Or the place we're in has completely changed because we're there. And that's what changed with my family. Like, they saw it. It touched each of them differently. And it wasn't of my choice. It was actually just the way God was working through me in my family's life. And it wasn't into a religious framework. It was actually just them experiencing like the relationship with God. And I don't know how far forward I want to, or how far forward I want to, I don't know how much further I want to fast forward, Sarah.
I would go into your dad. You can do it.
um, every time I would talk to my dad, which was most times like twice a day, my conversations were about my wife, my family, myself, him, and always about God in some way. And So this is after I became a believer. Like everything we did together, at some point, like it would get brought up, and I just watched. I watched my dad just become on fire for God. And in just like such a cool way, and just the way my dad was such a unique person in that, like I said before, he never met a stranger. My dad would just help anybody just for the fact that he just wanted to help them. My dad owned a business, and even when he couldn't like get someone's business, he would always direct them and try to help them to find something that would work out for them. And 2020 was an interesting year as we moved out to Littleton when I got hired with Denver Fire, and it was so hard for my parents watching us leave. And my dad was just like, my dad was quietly, he was very reserved about like being sad, but like very motivating for me and being like, dude, listen, like you got to go do what's best for your family, and I support you, and God's with you, and like, I love you, and I'll support you in this. And like still like the conversation's constantly around, like every time we talk, like I still have voicemails of him being like, you know, I'm reading Matthew, or we're going through the Old Testament and we're reading through Psalms, and your mom and I have just been like, my parents did. My parents read they did the Bible through the year together, and they would read it together, and I would have never done that before. And my dad, in like 2020 and into 2021, I started like seeing like this, my dad have like this massive draw towards heaven. Just being like, man, like, can you imagine what it's going to be like for us to see Jesus face? Like, can you imagine what it's going to be like for us to see him? And he's like, dude, we're not meant for this world. Like, we're going home, man. We're going home. And like, it was so nuts to hear him say this. He's like, he was out here visiting in November for our middle child, James. His would be his second birthday. And I remember going to the store with him. We're in the car, and he's just like, dude, I'm ready to go home. He's like, I can't wait. He's like, and it was just so weird listening to him talk about this stuff as far as like, dad, come on. He's like, listen, man, like, just understand, like, your mom's taken care of. Like, everything's going to be fine. Like, I want you guys to be happy. He's like, just know that I'm going home. It's going to be awesome. And he's like, can you imagine like what it's going to be like, how awesome it's going to be? I'm like, yeah, man, I do. He's like, it's like to be in front of the love of God like that. Like how amazing that must be. And then in our whole experience moving out here, like the transition out here was not easy at all. Like it was a struggle the whole time. I don't need to go into 2020 of what that's like. Everybody experienced the same thing. I went through a lot of health stuff in 2020. My whole life changed because of it. I got a huge kick in the teeth coming out here, starting over in the fire academy, and just like being humbled really in a really good way, and showing me what I'm made of. And I saw my dad for the last time when he came out in November. And between 2020 and my dad's death in February of 21, I saw my dad twice in person. My dad had a heart attack up in Michigan with my mom. And I remember being on the phone with my mom as this cop was taking her to the hospital and hearing that like my dad was in cardiac arrest and my mom was being taken to the hospital. She described everybody was like doing CPR on him. And my mom got to the hospital and they moved my mom into this visitation room. And I knew just because I worked in a hospital what that meant. It meant that my dad passed away. And as soon as I heard that, my mom's like, they're putting me in this separate room and I'm waiting to talk to a doctor. And as soon as I heard that, I knew right there that my dad died.
Mm.
And I had the most intense peace come over me. That knowing right there in that moment, my dad, although he already took his last breath here, is fully breathing in front of Christ right now. And like my dad is in such peace. And I'm like, I started thinking about like, how did this all happen? Like this whole story just put my dad on fire to the point now where like my dad's gone. My life's changed. I didn't see it, but I know my dad's at peace. And I'm like, man, that would I felt this peace right now if God didn't use me in the way he did. Like, what an awesome part of the story. But like my dad was the cornerstone of my family. So like I heard my mom, all my mom's struggles, like all my mom's prayers through that whole thing. No, I can't lose my husband. I can't do this. I can't do this, Jimmy. I can't do this, Jimmy. I can't lose your father. Like Matthew 26, right there. Like, I can't do this. Um, 4 days after, okay. We fast forwarded a lot, Sarah.
I think you're doing good. You're married to a beautiful wife. You got children. Russ updated us on that.
I do want to talk about how I met her, though, in a minute.
You mean that hipster woman singing on stage?
Yeah, I do. If we're going to stay here in this, I probably should just finish all of it.
Yeah, I agree.
4 days after my dad died, my wife's brother committed suicide. And my story isn't unique. Like this happens to people all the time. And now I'm in the place where I'm asking the same questions over and over again. Why and how could this happen all right here? My dad was the cornerstone of my family. He was the one who brought everybody together, and that's gone. A suicide destroys a family because there's so many unknowns and there's just a bunch of guilt that everybody else carries in I should have done's. And I just want to remind you all that like I'm married with 2 kids at this point, living away from my family, starting new. And like this just wreaked havoc on a lot of my life. I was in a perpetual motion of just constantly working, providing in Chicago. My wife and I had an okay relationship in Chicago, but not great. We move out here. Everything happens in 2020, 2 deaths in 21, both in February within 4 days of each other. And then just the shit hit the fan with us. We couldn't grieve together. We didn't know how to grieve together. I was taken to my own vices, which was alcohol a lot. It was just my wife and I were constantly arguing. And there's just this interesting place where like my wife and I were brought together because I met her because she was singing at the church we gathered with first. And I told Chad and Sarah when I first saw her, we were standing in the balcony, I'm like, I'm going to marry that girl right there. And I'm like, no.
I will attest. He did say that. He did. I thought he was crazy because he hated hipsters, people. And Joy at the time was billboard hipster singing on stage. And James was like, I'm going to marry her. I'm going to marry that one right there.
That's my girl right there, for sure. And like, that's what brought us together. There's a fun story of us, like her avoiding me for like a year and a half to 2 years, and then finally agreeing to go on a date with me. And then me just completely blowing her away with how awesome I am. And then, but it's not like marriage is hard, and we got married fast. And like, we both came to marriage with our own broken stuff, but like, I want you to just couple in all the things that I just added. And once again, the story is not rare. Like, there's a lot of people that go through the same thing. Our marriage almost fell apart. Like, my wife wanted to get a divorce. We went through a 2-year period of just like really in the trenches as far as like where we were going. I fought so hard for us to stay together. And this was a really interesting moment for me because like now we have like this, you have this opportunity, you have this experience with God individually, right? And then you have this experience with God with other people, like the community around it, like you experiencing the church that's together at this point, and then community together, like lifting each other up. And then like you take that away, and then you put everything else that life is going to bring to you. And then you're kind of left in this space where it's like, if all this is true, are you still going to believe this in this moment? Like, is this still true right now? And I remember just like this has been this whole season that we're talking about has been the most life-changing experience of my life, in the way that like this has completely showed me the freedom that I have in Christ, like apart from everything else. I had all the things that I feel like I could have identified with that had security, stability, like marriage, family, job, like confidence, identity. All this stuff just starts getting taken from you. And I was left to just be like, well, I guess it's just me and you, God. And like, I think the interesting thing for me too is like, this was still all something that was just like, everything sounds great when things are good. All this sounds so awesome when things are good, right? It's not until like things go to shit to where like this actually becomes something. You're like, man, am I still willing to choose joy now in this moment? And I'll tell you, a lot of times I did not. Like, I was so depressed. But like, this is the interesting thing. I remember, so like we were like living in separate rooms. And I remember I could not sleep. I was so anxious, like depressed. And I remember the only way I could sleep, but I would just literally throw on Psalms on my phone and I would just let it play. and let it play and let it play. And I remember waking up. I wake up like 4 or 5 times a night, just an anxious wreck. And I remember waking up and Psalm 139 was on. And it describes, in my opinion, like the most beautiful description of God's intimacy with us. Like, Christ is the one who truly tore the veil, who truly showed that like there's not a single thing that separates us from God. But this was being tried to make clear to us, even from David. Like, through Psalm 139, it says, there's not a place you go that you do not know where I'm going. Like, there's not a step I take that you are not with me. There's not a breath I take that is not your grace. There's not a thought in my head that you do not know. Like, from when I was being made and my form was hidden from the world, you knew me. Like, you were weaving me into existence. All the days of my life were put in your book, although they had not happened yet. Like, this is describing this unbreakable intimacy we have with God that like cannot change. You can run from it as much as you can. You are still living and breathing in his grace. And like, it was in that moment that I started realizing, like, even as depressed as I was, like, of all the things in my life before, when I was a defiant kid whipping a Bible against the wall, like trashing my life with alcohol, like on a call where somebody is dying and I'm holding their hand, or like pulling somebody out of a basement in a fire. Like, there is no place I go that you have not been with me, are with me, and are like 100% of part of my existence in that moment. And that was the most freeing thing I've ever experienced in my life. Like, I still to this day, and she don't like this, I am closer to God than I will ever be to my life. My identity does not come in my marriage from my marriage anymore, or who we are as a couple. My identity comes from him first. And realistically, Sarah, Russ, that would have not been possible. And I say this now looking back, that I had not gone through all of those moments that even pushed me to the individual edge of my life. I pray that's not the same story for everybody else, but that's mine. Like, yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you, James. It's not easy being intimate and letting people into those spots, but as you and I discussed, so many people relate because it's not rare.
Mm-mm.
And those doubts, like you were so on fire, right? And then it all gets taken away. Where do you sit? Where do you lie? How do you handle it? How do you go forward? So how do you go forward? Like, where are you at today with fire department, sharing your story, you and your wife? Give us a good conclusion to praise report. Russ, I think I'm gonna have to do that in every podcast. Praise report.
Well, okay,
like
so first of all, like, my wife and I are probably, this is the greatest our marriage has ever been, and this is like still super hard. Like, we just had our third kid. We finally had a little girl. Yeah, girl, love it. So I got my 2 little truckies, my boys, and then I got my little girl, and we're doing so well. Like, I say the one thing that's really interesting about that, we did a marriage program that changed our life in a way, because the whole focus of the program was your relationship with God, not how your spouse is screwing things up. So you draw a circle around yourself and you deal with the person in the circle. And it changed the way we communicate. And God used this whole thing to just bring us so close. And I'm so thankful for that because it changed the entire landscape of our marriage. So we're doing very well there. Let's see. So as far as like the fire department concern goes, like since I've come out to Denver, I feel like the interesting thing as far as professionally goes is that God has given me things that I needed, not many things that I've wanted. But in every way, it's been so cool watching like the way God moves and works in the places you're at. Back to that same references as far as like you're a light in a darkened room. Like the darkness cannot change the fact that you're there. Like, and I can't change it either. Like even when I'm sucking at life or just not in the mood, like it doesn't matter. Like God is still he still works through you. You don't have a choice, you know. And also too, like God still works through people that don't even know him, which is I see every day with the people I work with, you know. Regardless, the thing that's that's awesome is that I have some incredible stories from the people I work with. I work with such awesome people out here. I've seen God move in incredible ways in just being able to hear people share their story. And that's pretty much what this is, right? It's just like, are you able to listen enough to actually hear somebody like and share their story and like share and then when they open up an opportunity for you to share yours, which could be never or could be like it's not the intention. It's not my intention to always like share. But realistically, I think that I've seen is more powerful is the way I'm living, the way I care about people and how much I listen. And I've seen that absolutely move people. I'm going to refrain from individual names, but I've seen where decided I know that the guys are probably going to watch this, so I want to be really careful with this. So there's some things that I can't share specifically, but I'll just say this. Interesting thing too is just being in a true ministry of presence and where you're at.
Yeah.
I've seen God change marriages in just the ability to have conversations and share my story and hear a story. Like, I've seen God change people's lives in that, like, people share where they're at as far as their own health and mental health. And like, how do you create enough space for somebody to be able to actually share with you that, like, hey, by the way, I am thinking about killing myself. Like, that's been one of those things to me where it's like, man, I'm just as much of a joker as everybody else that works here. And if any of you guys know who firemen are, like, we're just a bunch of pranksters living in a house together and doing hood rat stuff with our buds. Like, that's very boiled down and probably not entirely accurate, but like, I'm so thankful to see that like somehow, some way, God has just finagled his way in the everyday. And like in that is allowing people to still see freedom, like from you, God, not from this religious framework. Like, okay, so yeah, I'm gonna refrain from sharing individual story.
I think I mean, I get the tension for sure. You know, just so you know, it's in a similar way. It's oftentimes like even with Lark as a ministry, I get told a lot like, man, you have all these stories, Russ, that you sort of share here and there, or you share like in conversations with people. You should get online and share all these stories, and it's like, well, you can't, right? Like these are people that I love and who trust me.
Right.
But I think one thing the audience can pick up on is your story, man, is it's unique to you, but it's not unique to all,
No.
right? And the thing that I keep hearing through it is a guy who, through friendship, Okay. Through people just being the church where they are as friends. Somebody who found freedom in who Jesus is for him. Okay. Somebody who discovered that faith wasn't about striving to become something more. It was actually about trusting in who Jesus already is for you.
Yeah.
Through the thick and thin, the good times, the hard times. And I know that's been your story. And I've seen that, because we've been friends, dude, since that day, man, long ago that you described. And, all three of us, even, right? The friendships and you guys being not just like listeners or consumers of the Lark world, like you're Larks, man. You're passing on the freedom that you found and just watching you do that over the years. And the thing that I know is you shared through those really just real dark moments, man, in your story, struggles. The thing I loved most was that you never offered like advice. You never gave like a to-do list. You just talked about the freedom that you found because of who Jesus is in the midst of it. And that's led to you being a neighbor and a friend and you know, a firefighter at this station who's passing on, right? That freedom, man.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the audience can definitely pick up on you got a lot of stories. And I can testify as somebody who's been encouraging you in your journey. Amen, man, for what you do.
Yeah, bud.
Amen.
Absolutely.
Well, cheers to this, dude. I know we could keep chatting for sure. Anything to add here, Miss Sarah?
No, when we were talking about uh his story before this, I know he's a chaplain in Colorado through the fire department. I know he's got his men praying over dinner before they eat. Why'd that make me emotional?
Mm.
I think just because it's so powerful as a fire wife, we're sending our men off to a really dangerous profession. And we have this blind faith that they're going to come home, but that's not promised. Um, you're giving these men who may or may not say that they believe in God, you're giving them a moment to talk to that God. And that might be that one moment that right before a really dangerous call, they have that in their mind to know, hey, that guy James is always talking about and who we're praying to over dinner might be with me at this fire. As a fire wife, like that means so much. And you're impacting that fire department so heavily in an amazing, beautiful way. And as the intro to who you are, of just being this dynamic presence when you're in a room, it showed through your whole story. And you can carry it back to your father and his story. And it's not even something you try to do. It's just literally who you are. You are this addicting presence. I love being in a room with you. So all you Larkers, if there's ever an event and James is invited, there's probably going to be a wait list because we're all going to want to hang out with you. I've been through your marriage. Your marriage showed me a lot of who God is. I've done more deconstructing than I can count. I think I doubted God so much in his power to heal a marriage, walking through yours with you. And your marriage is this beautiful reminder to me of what God can do, even through you, through your darkest times. It was so dark, I couldn't comprehend. And I'm like, God, will you step into this? I'm not comfortable in a gray space. I'm an optimist. I don't look at the gray. That gray becomes almost a denial to me. So having to go through that with you was a huge encouragement to me of what God does and how he can change what I thought was unchangeable. And that's shameful to admit, but it is the truth. So I'm very grateful to be a part of your intimate life. And it's beautiful to see where you and your family are at. And as someone who has moved 12 times, I also know how hard it is to be transplanted somewhere that you didn't call home. but look at what you're doing. And you guys, like, this podcast could have been so much longer. What he does with his neighbors, what he does with his chili cook-offs, what he does with the community as a whole. It is so exciting, and it's so encouraging just to see like what he does in his life. So thank you for just giving us a glimpse into it.
Well, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, dude. The only downside I feel like for you, and just as you shared your story, is like through all the change, man, like the one thing you couldn't change was just the way you look.
I knew it. I knew it was coming, dude.
So wrong.
Hey, we can't make fun of each other when we see each other. What do we have? What do we have? And in my defense, Sarah,
man.
James dishes out more than he gets.
That's true. That's true. That's very true.
Oh man. Thanks for being with us. Serious.
Thank you guys. Yeah.
Sarah, thanks for making this happen.
Of course. It's hard scheduling with you boys, but we made it work.
Cheers to both of you. Cheers to both of you. And just really quick, just big shout out to all of you out there who support this movement of grace. Seriously. It's these are the times, these stories capture, right, the endless hours and travel spent with people and the beauty of just what Jesus does, man. When it's just no longer about who we're trying to be. It's just about being a friend who trusts him. Like, it's, man, the stories are endless. Amen. Amen. Cheers. Let me grab my mug here.
Throw up your golden girls, James.
Cheers.